Hello, everyone. It's Joe Polish.
And this is Dan Sullivan.
Hey, Dan. Here we are, 10X Talk. And the last episode, we talked about the impact filter that you had created after you had attended my Genius Network meeting. And we were talking about some of the different criteria, and you shared some great ideas that you got, like starting every business with writing a sales letter and the idea of handwriting some of the greatest writers and thinkers that you admire the most so you can integrate the words into your own, I guess, writing DNA, the strategy of paying everyone who does work for you 10% more, an idea you got from my friend Joel Weldon, who came to 25K, talking about speaking in actions, not abstractions. And then, you're going through all the list of how people get the most value out of an experience by using your own experience in my 25K group of how you do it. And then, you mentioned a comment about, let's talk on a future episode about the reverse of that, about how some people cut themselves off from getting value out of meetings, events, opportunities, and probably life in general. And so I'd like you to kind of go into that whole subject and talk about it.
In the program right now, because of the work that I'm doing with Peter Diamandis in the Abundance 360, I've been kind of taking a lot of things that we've done with Coach since we started the first workshop programs in 1989, and I'm reconfiguring it in my mind, putting it together in new ways. I started coaching in 1974, and I've personally coached 6,000 very, very interesting, intriguing individuals over that period of time. And I was beginning to think, is there kind of like a no or no-go kind of attitude that makes the difference between people who seem to have a really tough time in life and the people who seem to have an easy time in life? And I came up with the concept that it's all a question of gratitude. Whether people approach their life, their experiences, their relationships with a sense of gratitude, or whether it's the opposite of that, which I think is sort of a combination of envy, or it's a combination of resentfulness that people have. And so there's a lot of people who are what I would call on the take. They're trying to take from life, but they don't start off by giving anything to life. And I think that that is something that closes doors for a lot of people, and they can be highly talented. And Joe, you and I have met people who are super talented. In spite of their attitude, they've been super successful. They're enormously ambitious. But when you look at their life over quite a long period of time, it's marked by enormous amount of disappointment and setbacks and just generally an unhappiness on their part, because they're expecting to get more out of life and they're always somehow coming up on the short end. That was just my thought about it, and I just had this central focus of gratitude.
Right. So what are some of the lessons and actions and strategies that you can share with people listening? You have this great operating system, and you're also really aware of how people have operating systems that are littered with viruses and always break down and always shut people off. And how do you hack into your brain and wire it differently so that you don't trip yourself up, and so that you don't leave a lot of scorched earth as you go through your experiences with others?
Well, one of the things, and I'm going to continue on with the theme of gratitude, one of the interesting things about gratitude, and I'm just going to talk about it because it's closely associated with another word, which is appreciation. So one year, my staff, for a Christmas present, gave me the really big dictionary. This is the Oxford English Dictionary, and it's 15 volumes. So what most people would get in a 300-page book, I got in 15 books that each have 500 pages. So it's about 7,500 pages, So you can imagine how in-depth the actual definitions of words are. So the word appreciation in the Oxford English Dictionary is a column and a half, and they give you about 15 different uses of it over the last 500 or 600 years. But there's two meanings that really pop out of it. The first one is create increased value, so that when you appreciate someone, you're actually increasing their value. And if you think of the word appreciation, it's used in the economic world, finance world, And we talk about gold appreciating. We talk about real estate appreciating. We talk about stocks appreciating. The value of anything is appreciating means the value is going up. So I just linked up that notion of appreciation back to gratitude. And I says that when you're grateful for something and you express that gratitude, first of all, you take up the value of that in your own mind, but in expressing it, you actually take the other person's sense of value up of who they are and what they're doing. And then the second meaning of appreciation is to fully understand. So there's a term, I now fully appreciate the situation. It's used in military terms. It's an old form. We don't use it anymore, but scouts were sent out to appreciate the battlefield, to fully understand the battlefield, and they would report back. So I link that also back that when you're grateful for something, you're actually saying, I fully understand the importance of this. I fully understand the value of it. So more and more I've been playing with that whenever I go into a situation, whenever I'm meeting a person, what I try to do, Joe, and, it takes time, so I have to be kind of choosy. I have to be kind of selective about doing this, but I'll sit down and before I meet the person, I'll write down 8 things I'm grateful for about the person. It's not necessarily they've done anything for me, but I'm just grateful for who they are. I'm just grateful for how they act. And in this case, I don't actually say these things when I go into the conversation. I might not. But I certainly wouldn't tell them all 8 things. When I was coming here, I just decided that I was going to write down 8 things that I'm really, it's a little bit stilted. But what it does is it sets me up, first of all, with a higher sense of the person's value. But the other thing is it sets me up with a much fuller understanding of how significant they are. And when I go into the meeting with them, whether it's social or whether it's business, they pick up on the fact of my appreciation. They just pick up on my attitude. I'll just naturally talk in a way and communicate in a way that comes from appreciation. So yesterday I was in a little meeting and there was kind of a working relationship difficulty where 3 people were having a little bit of difficulty with another person in the company. And the way they were talking about the person, that they were kind of digging a bit of a negative hole about that person. Joe, have you ever seen the situation where somebody starts saying something negative about someone and then everybody piles on?
Oh, yeah. It's just like...
and after a while, they've dug themselves such a hole that it's going to be very difficult for them to actually communicate with this person. And I pointed out, and I said, you're not preparing your minds in the right way for having a meeting with this person. So I said, what I would suggest is that you don't talk to this person until collectively you find 8 things that you're really grateful about this person for. So you just prepare yourself in the best possible way for actually meeting the person. And I said, I don't really care what you talk about, but if you go in from your negative hole, I'm going to tell you, you're going to produce a very, very negative result. But if you go in with a sense of appreciation, you're going to loosen the situation up. You're going to inject positive energy into the situation. It hasn't happened yet, but they were kind of struck by this. And they said, well, we don't really appreciate anything. And I said, yeah, because that's the way you've set it up. But if you spent some time and actually wrote it out, you'd be quite amazed at how much there is to appreciate about this person, because I know the other person and there is. So I'm just putting this out there that this is a very active principle. I don't look at gratitude as something that somebody does for me and then I'm grateful. I use it as a very active, a proactive principle, that it's something that I'm going to do for any situation, or I'm going to do it for any individual that I'm involved for. It doesn't matter what they do for me. It's how I'm going to set up the situation.
Right. How do you, and I don't want to take it off subject too much, how do you decide when to cut someone out of your life?
Usually they volunteer.
Uh-huh. Yeah, so you usually don't have to have that Godfather talk and tell them to leave. They just kind of go off. But mentally, I know you're very good about criteria and boundaries. And I already know in a lot of ways what crossing the line with you, I know that someone can be incredibly nice to you as a client, but if they're abusive to your staff, you'll never tolerate it. So I already kind of know some of your MO. It's more so a question for people listening. You do have such an ability to find appreciation and great qualities of people. And one of the things you've done for so many of your strategic coach clients, myself included, is you're able to edify and see things in them that they don't even see in themselves. And at the same time, you also know when someone is so incredibly toxic that the time and energy needed, it's not your role, it's not your responsibility. And at a certain point, it's kind of like Peter Diamandis has this, Peter's laws, one of them is the reverse of the squeaky wheel gets the oil, it's the squeaky wheel gets replaced. Mm-hmm. So, I know you kind of have your own way of thinking about that, and I wondered if you could just speak to that.
Well, you use the word criteria, and it all comes down to criteria. What I try to do is depersonalize the situation, that it's not necessarily about the person, it's about certain kinds of behavior. Uh-huh. So there's certain kinds of behavior that I don't want to be around it. There are certain ways that people act. So I've told myself that if I'm ever in a situation where this behavior, and I'm very specific about things because my feeling is that if you have things going around in your head that tells you don't like something, well, write it down and actually establish some laws for yourself that this is unacceptable. This is very, very unacceptable behavior. And if you've sold yourself on this set of laws, then what I've discovered is it's much easier. I'm not saying it's really easy, but it's much easier to actually just call somebody on it. And I says, look, the way you're acting right now is really quite unacceptable. And I tell you that I can't operate in a situation where somebody's operating. It's not about the person. You're not saying that they're not worth anything. It's just that they're demonstrating a set of behaviors that's just not acceptable. First of all, very few people talk to other people that way because they usually make a personal attack. I'm not making a personal attack. I'm simply laying out some criteria. If we want to have some cooperation here, then these are the rules. I won't get involved if these rules are not followed. And one of two things happens. The person, you just never see them again, or they do their best to actually correct their behavior. And I think both outcomes are desirable.
Yeah, that is great. That is great. So even in your book, you wrote The Laws of Lifetime Growth. I mean, if you just take a look at that title, I mean, you kind of think in terms of laws, not quote unquote police laws, but you write your own rule book. I mean, this is the rules. Yeah. These are my laws. These are the boundaries that work for me. These are the things that don't. And you kind of follow your own laws. And when you behave your own laws, you don't get yourself in a self-imposed prison with relationships you don't want, with situations you don't want. And when you do find yourself in messes, you're a guy that I know gets out of them far quicker than anyone else. And you tend not to repeat mistakes. I mean, because you're so good at learning from it.
Well, first of all, I've spent whole periods of my life when I didn't do that, and it was very painful. It's not like I was born this way. As most entrepreneurs I often say, every entrepreneur I know tells a better game than they actually played. Everybody talks about the high points. Nobody talks about the low points.
Right.
As a result of my business career, I've gone through a divorce, I've gone through 2 bankruptcies, and I have to tell you, I make a joke about it, and I call it extreme market research, but I have to tell you, it was very painful when I was going through it. I can remember months when I just wasn't making any headway. It was very painful, very frustrating, but what I wanted to do was learn as much from those experiences as possible. I've always had this real desire to use my own experience as my number one school. So these are lessons. They're painful lessons, but nevertheless, they're valuable lessons. So there's just certain people who, they're new to my life, but I've met someone like them in the past, and the behavior is the same. And I didn't call it in the past, and now I call it really fast. I said, look, this is unacceptable. I'm not going to put up with this. If you want to deal with me and you want to be in a relationship with me, these are the rules. And, well, who are you to give the rules? And I said, everybody can make their own rules. I said, I'm just telling you what mine are.
Right, right. Do you find yourself at times, or almost never at this point in your life, you've been very open, and we've done episodes in the past about how parts of your life when things didn't work, we talked about when you had your bankruptcy and divorce, and as you call them, extreme forms of market research. So, you've been very open in what you've written about, what Strategic Coach on 10X Talk about things that work and things that don't work. Do you second guess yourself?
I catch myself very quickly doing it. The trigger is always there to second guess yourself. And I think what I've trained myself to do is to immediately switch into the lesson format. Okay, this is what happened. I'm kind of ticked off. I'm feeling really crappy. So what's the lesson to be learned here so that it doesn't get repeated? I think the big thing is that I think everybody should be allowed a mistake. I don't think they should allow themselves a second mistake of the same kind. Okay, and I think where I really, really see people leading lives that they find incredibly unsatisfying, the reason for that is that they keep making the same mistake over and over again, even though each time they did it, it was extremely painful and they would never want to repeat it. Nevertheless, they didn't take that seriously and they didn't actually put it under the spotlight and say, okay, what do we have to do now so that this never gets repeated again? And I think the laws come out of that experience. If you drive through a city and you see a traffic light and you stop at a traffic light, remember that's a memorial. Somebody was killed or injured at this spot. That's why they have the traffic light. So a major city has all these memorials all over the place, and they're called traffic lights or stop signs.
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, so bringing it back to where, you're talking about gratitude, you said it's a very proactive principle versus reactive. And you've always made a great distinction between the two, and I'd love to have you talk about that.
Reactive is that you're passive and the world does something good for you. Somebody else does something good for you, and you say, I'm grateful for that, but you're not the one that started the whole process. Somebody outside of you started the whole process. And so you're reacting. It was somebody else's idea to do something good for you, and you're just responding in a generous or graceful way, or a polite way anyway. The difference is that proactive gratitude doesn't depend on anyone doing anything for you. It depends upon you looking at something and saying, I really appreciate the value in this, and I really appreciate, what's really involved going on here. So the whole activity happens in your brain. You're the self-starter here. You're starting the gratitude process, and it doesn't require something to be done for you or something good to happen for you. This is a great power, Joe. If you think about it, this is a phenomenal power. It means that in any situation in life, I can start a value-creating process. I can start an understanding process that increases the value of everything around me. So it doesn't matter where I'm born. It doesn't really matter what my circumstances are. I can constantly increase the value of my experience just by being proactively grateful.
Yes. And is this something that you notice is difficult?
Well, it's like going to the gym, Joe. Your first time, it's hard, it's painful, and everything like that. But you're one of the most constant gym rats that I know. I mean, has it benefited you, the workouts? And I know you do the P90X, and that's a workout and a half. I mean, is it worth the effort and the years that you've devoted to this?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, do I always enjoy it? No, but do I enjoy the consequences of it? Yes, because they're very positive and there's so much value that it's the consistency of doing it is absolutely worth the investment.
Well, the other thing is that you constantly have an increase of muscle confidence. That's one of the biggest things about fitness. People say, well, what's fitness? And I said, well, it's muscle confidence, that your brain has this total confidence that regardless of what comes up, you have the muscles, you have the physical capability to handle the situation. And I would say that if you make the connection that gratitude is an incredible intellectual, psychological, emotional muscle, and I'm going to practice gratitude. 3 o'clock to 4 o'clock, that's when I'm practicing gratitude. People say, practicing gratitude, what's that mean? I said, well, what's spending 3 or 4 hours at the gym mean? It means going and working on certain muscles. And I'm just going to work on a muscle that increases my ability in any situation to actually proactively create value in that situation before anything good happens to me out of the situation.
Yeah, yeah.
Just a neat way to approach life. And then I'm not sitting there saying, where's the meaning in life? Where's the purpose? People were supposed to give me a purpose and a direction and a meaning. I says, wake up. Read the fine print when you were born. Is there any promise like that when you were born? I checked mine out. There's nothing in my fine print of my contract when I came into life that tells me that anyone or anything is supposed to do anything for me. The fact that your parents take care of you, that's a bonus. The fact that you grow up in a country that's very free, that's a bonus. I mean, you didn't do anything to deserve this. It was just a lucky roll of the dice. And here you are. You were born healthy. You were born smart. You were born creative. This is all bonus. You're in bonus territory. You don't deserve anything as a result of this.
Let me ask you something also, because I constantly remind myself when I'm feeling moody or whatever, that the mere fact that I was born in America is just a fantastic bonus. It really is. And that I have so many advantages that are available to me. And for people that, are having continuously crappy days or having things happen to them in pulling themselves out of the mud, I mean, if they're really deep in the mud mentally, financially, a terrible breakup, a tough illness. I mean, I know you've had so many experiences in your life, plus one of your early, I don't know if you'd call it a career or job, was you were going around interviewing handicapped people and disabled people. Mm-hmm. And you gained some really incredible insights out of people that were experiencing tremendous amounts of pain, and even what you learned about gratitude in the process. So for people that are listening to this, they're like, man, you don't understand my situation, or easy for you to say, what would you say to that type of thinking?
Well, you're right down to the single most important decision that any human being has to make about their life. I think I may have said this already in a certain fashion, but you can choose to create it or take what the world gives you. I remember Gilda Radner, the great comedian on Saturday Night Live, who died way too early. She had this great line, and she says, when I was a little girl, I wanted to be somebody. And she says, now that I'm older, I realized I should have been more specific. And the whole thing about this is that when it comes right down to it, at the end of your life, there's only one person who's completely 100% responsible for everything that happened to you. No one else is responsible for it. And what I'm talking about, what happened to you, not the events, but your actual experience of the events. All sorts of weird things can happen in life that's beyond our control. You can be in a war zone. You can be born not physically well. You can have all sorts of disadvantages, but those are just the events. Those are outside. That isn't who you are. You are the person who responds to those things, and some people can go into a pity stage. They can go into a victim stage. What they don't realize that that's a pure choice.
Yeah.
Whether they want to do that or not, and you can choose not to. You can choose not to respond to it in that way. And that's what I noticed. Just the reference to the disability and handicap. I actually interviewed in depth 40 people with 40 different kinds of disabilities. And these were the best of the bunch. These were people who had really made their lives great. In every case, I noticed that there was a complete take control. They did not feel sorry about themselves. They did not think that they were weird. They couldn't care less about the whole notion of normal. And they just had their life to live, and they had opportunities, and they had talents, and they just put them all together in a unique way. And they were far more successful than a lot of people who were just born with every kind of advantage, but never actually took advantage of their advantage.
Yeah.
I mean, look at Sean Stevenson. I mean, a great friend of yours.
Right.
Sean, could have died 110 times by the time he was 10 years old. Is given every kind of physical disability that one human being can have and still survive to adulthood. Look at the life that he's created out of this.
Yeah, and for people that don't know Sean, timetostand.com, he 3 feet tall, he has a brittle bone condition, had over 200 bones break in his body. I mean, major bones. By the time he was 18 years old, incredibly deformed arms, and he's never walked.
Constant pain.
Yeah.
Constant pain.
Yeah, constant pain. And, he's 3 feet tall in a wheelchair. And now he's married to the love of his life. And, and he has to, and it's so interesting. It's like Sean constantly gets clients that they're definitely afraid of dating and finding a partner. And they're like, I'm not good enough. I'm too old. I'm too young. I'm too fat. I'm too this. I'm too that. And he's like, dude, I'm 3 feet tall in a wheelchair. Look at me. And, he's like,
what's he weigh? He weighs,
45 pounds.
He weighs 45 pounds. And he's a major platform speaker. He's a best-selling author. He's had lots of videos and everything else. And I said, whose body you want to walk around in a day, yours or his, Well, first of all, you can't walk around in his body, but, he's got an outrageous sense of humor and everything else. This was all a series of choices that Sean started making at a very early age.
Yeah, exactly. So the last thing I'll mention, and then I'll ask you one final question, we'll wrap up. I've seen a lot of seminar speeches and stuff where they take the word responsibility and they break it up and they're like response-ability. And sometimes it's effectively explained. Other times it's just kind of a cute sort of seminar cliche. And I think what you've just talked about on this episode is the greatest sort of explanation that I have ever heard or seen as it relates to being responsible is how you respond in your ability to increase your ability to respond, because your whole notion of gratitude and how you do it and how you've talked about it is literally a methodology that anyone listening to this will have a lot more abilities to respond to life and be a hell of a lot more grateful if they basically give their brain the directions that we've talked about on this episode and the previous episode as it relates to gratitude and just treating people in general. So the whole response ability, because this is about developing abilities, right?
Yes. Yeah, it's all about abilities, and you're going to, you're going to be working on something. Might as well work on this. This is a fail-safe. And just one last thing before we close off, Joe, is that gratitude is a very, very interesting sensation in your nervous system that literally when you're feeling gratitude, you can't think any negativity. You can't be envious and grateful. You cannot be guilty and grateful. You cannot be angry and grateful. You can't be feeling unfairly treated and feeling grateful. So the reason why I just developed this one quality is because I don't try to change negative habits. I don't try to change negative thoughts. I just cut off their air supply.
Right. That's I just cut off there. So love it. And you know what? That's the recommendation for everyone there. And last thing, Dan, so how does this help someone grow a company 10 times if it's not obvious?
Well, just imagine the impact that day by day, and again, I was saying you could spend all day from morning till night writing out what you're grateful for, but you have to be selective. Like 2 days from now, I'm in New York and I'm giving a big speech. So tomorrow on the plane ride up, I'm just going to write out the 8 things that I'm really grateful for the opportunity to speak to this group and what I'm grateful for by the particular type of people who are going to be there. And I'm grateful for the person who invited me and everything else. And then when I walk into the room, I'm coming from this attitude. And it really doesn't matter what I say in the speech. What's going to get communicated is my basic thing that I've really increased the value of this group, and I really fully understand the importance of who they are. Regardless of what I say or how the speech goes, it always turns out really well.
Yeah. And because you set it up that way.
Yeah.
And so that's great.
I don't allow any room in my mind for anything negative to happen.
Yeah. That's awesome. So I guess the thing I will end with is thank you, Dan. Always just such useful directions and insights that you always share, and you're a living example of all of this. And I want to encourage all of our listeners to share this with someone that you know could benefit from hearing it. You'd be doing them a favor and probably yourself a favor too if you interact with them. And in order to have the conditions that you want, it's how you set it up. And I've really learned to think through spending time with you, Dan, how to think in terms of the conditions I want in my life. And in order to have those conditions, you got to set things up. I'm not just going to get conditions just because I want them, unless I'm really lucky. But even that, having access to money, opportunities, so much abundance isn't anywhere as exciting and useful if you are not approaching it and experiencing it with a good attitude. And so this is an all-encompassing better way to just operate. And so thank you.
There's a multiplier that comes out of this. You influence people, you attract opportunities to yourself, you attract capabilities to yourself. And if you're on a 15-year string of really good luck, it shows up as 10 times.
Yeah, exactly. So to all our listeners, I'll probably say this on many of our episodes to remind you what is the actions that you're going to take as a result of hearing this. How can you apply this to your life, personally and professionally, today, right now? And please leave your comments on 10X Talk. And thank you for listening. And me and Dan look forward to hearing the results and successes you have. And if you've not downloaded the free reports and things that we offer on the website, if you're listening to this on iTunes or in other places, go to 10xtalk.com and check it out. And if you're ready for some real serious, in-depth, beyond 10X Talk, check out strategiccoach.com. and 25kgroup.com, because there's much more where this came from. And we'll talk with you on the next episode of 10X Talk. And thank you, Dan.
Thank you, Joe.